But I do want to start. I want to start talking about the very, very beginning of your game. The first 10 to 15 minutes of Firewatch are something I think a lot of people didn't see coming. It's very different than the rest of the game. Tell me a little bit about how that came to be, how that might have changed over time, because it's really, really, really effective.
It's kind of, I guess, how we decided to get people into Henry's mind, and also, I guess, me convincing people that what the story was going to start with. I built that over the course of like a long weekend, I think, in Twine, which is
built that
like,
before we had an office.
prototype.
oh yeah, I built that in the
Oh, wow.
Thumbs office,
Yeah.
and like back in the concrete hole.
So you definitely knew like what the game was going to be, what it was going to be about.
No.
that early.
That was
Oh,
like
okay.
an
I knew who
exercise,
Henry was.
though,
Okay.
so.
Yeah, I knew who Henry was, and I figured if we knew who Henry was, then we could just go from there.
I have an idea. I got this damaged man living in my mind. Let's get him out.
Or as some people would call a man.
It was a good way for you, Sean, to write Henry's backstory out in a way that was digestible for the team, but it also was filling a need that we had encountered really early when we were designing the story of Firewatch, which is we did not want Henry's backstory to be a mystery to players. We wanted them to feel like they knew his past in full, because we had some early versions of the beginning of the game that we were churning on that started off like 3 weeks in, where you're already Henry. It starts off with you just on any old day in your fire lookout tower, and then we realized that like the hypothetical situation that set off the alarm bells for us was like a player talking to Delilah and gets a little bit flirty, and then like we show Henry adjust his wedding ring as like, twist, you're playing as a married guy and you were just flirting, feel bad about yourself. And we was like, that's actually
That's
not
a bad game.
That's
Yeah.
not what we want the game to be. So we wanted you to be able to choose all of the things you do out in this job with a sense of who Henry is before he gets there, and having some sense of ownership over that, so that when you choose to say or withhold things to Delilah about your past or about your marriage or whatever else, you as a player feel like you have some ownership of that. That's our hope, at least.
Yeah. So is that
a thing I want to just mention real quick, because I think it's
Good try.
Shut up, Marty.
this is
Yeah,
gonna be
thank
real-
you guys for asking one question
cute
to start
podcast
the
you got here,
podcast.
but,
We're just going to talk nonstop for 3 hours now, because we've not spoken to anyone about
Well,
this game
it
yet.
just feels
so
like
true.
it feels like we missed like one step of that, which is that
Firewatch is a video
when
game.
Sean, when you made that, you were using Twine, like the
Yeah.
the text game creation tool.
It's like a choose your own adventure tool
And
that you should use. It's really good.
Like, to my memory, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but like as I remember it, you didn't make that with the intention of it being part of the game. It
No.
was like
It was
you
just to show
at
us,
some point,
right?
like someone, and maybe it was you, I can't even remember, was like, "What if this is how the game started?" But that was
Jared,
that was like months after
I think
you
it was
actually
sort of,
made
I
the
think
prototype.
it was floated early on as maybe we could open the game with this, and then that just like got buried by developing the rest of the game. So then
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
that's the only
it
thing I
being
wanted to say. I
needed
just
as
thought
a
that
part
was
of the
a
game.
weird, cool
yeah,
thing.
it wasn't like, oh, I'm building a part of the game
Right.
now. It was,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna do this exercise so we can everyone can play a game that gets everyone. You can become familiar with who the character is, like the whole team. Like, doesn't matter what your job is. And then
Like, I feel like it was more like a pitch from you to be like, hey, this is how I think Henry is.
And
Why
I remember
did you
you
guys
also
play it and tell me if you want to make a game about this
Yeah.
guy?
And you also wanted to be
2
able to
years.
experiment with interactive dialogue, I remember.
Yeah, yeah. It was more an
Yeah.
exercise, like not really like, this is how we're gonna start the game
Exactly.
at all.
And then actually, just to keep talking, since that was such an old like foundational piece of our thinking of the story, but it was not in the game for a long time. It was. I remember we had the day 2, which is the day that you got and find the cut telephone line, and Henry and Delilah are having a ton of conversations through that entire part. That was actually, I think, Sean being like, "Oh my God, how do I have to fill? There's so much. This is the longest amount of walking we've had to develop in the game." And then you went back and made sure that every single thing that they were talking about was secretly a reference to that Twine. And then it ended up feeling like we were really smart and had a plan. But we did not.
Yeah.
Was part of that reaction to sort of like make sure that, hey, we don't want Henry's past shrouded in mystery? Was that like almost reactionary to, because Sean and Jake, you guys worked on Telltale's The Walking
What you're
Dead.
about to say is correct. Yes.
So whereas you're playing The Walking Dead season 1, and for so much of it, you really don't know who Lee was before you gain control over him. Was sort of that a kind of pivot away from that?
100%. Like, I remember sitting in that old office in like November 2013 and being like, so much of The Walking Dead season 1 was, did he do it? Didn't he do it? The character on screen knows, I don't. Let's experience the story. But we were making a game that was first person. So it's like, you are more, even more so him now. So you have to know.
And the story of the game in Firewatch, like a lot of the moment-to-moment stuff is about the fallout from that on his life. Whereas in The Walking Dead, like,
Well, I think it became that, yeah. But it
Yeah.
was a reaction at the beginning for sure. I remember thinking like, well, I did one game like that, like not doing that again. You know, it was definitely that's completely correct. Yeah.
Hi. Got to keep taking this microphone.
Really didn't handle that
Hello.
well.
No, it's fine. I have no grace. I think what makes that intro so effective is you have all these different choices, the binary choices about like what you say and what you do and what dog you adopt, and then you kind of pivot and you stop making the choices. Like the bad stuff in Henry's life starts happening, and you click it the same way you do when you make a choice, but it's just like, nope, that's not a choice in your life. This bad thing is happening.
Yeah.
This is how you're reacting. That's out of your control. And then you pair that with your music, Chris, and it's phenomenal. Like you have this.
Thank
Tell
you.
me about the music in that scene because it's really, really, really great.
that's Chris's favorite track in the game.
Well,
Awkward silence.
sorry,
Isn't it, Chris?
Because you're you. I was like, I can't tell. No, he's saying that because that was in there. I think the first completed music in the game. I can't remember if that came first or if the end of day one break-in music came first.
That one did, but when it's it was like the second piece of music written, and it's
Yeah.
the first thing that you hear when you play the
Right.
game. So we've heard that
and
song.
also
some
that was
times.
the first. That was definitely the thing that it definitely is was the first interactive music track in the game, which meant that a lot of testing was required to make it work right. It also just the way that we built that scene meant that if you wanted to test anything in the scene for a long time, you had to play through the entire thing because we didn't have save and load working for a long time in development. So I just heard that goddamn thing.
Yeah.
So,
Chris,
so
I'm sorry, I
much.
immediately turned this answer into you talking about why you don't like the
No,
piece of
it's
music.
okay.
Which
I
is
actually,
not,
I'm now I'm happy with it again, I guess, because I haven't listened to it nonstop for the last 6 months. But no, that music, I'm trying to remember. I think that I because there was so little of the game just existent yet, in the world when I tried to score that, because we went back and forth on that a lot. It was like, should we have a really detailed soundscape that's like mimicking everything Henry does, like a radio play, and then for a lot of sort of just creative reasons that didn't really make any sense, because it's like, well, there's one scene where he beats the shit out of a guy, and like, are you going to turn that into a comic book?
Yeah.
Like, what? That would just be weird to like hear that.
and the later stuff gets more sort
And
of
then also,
abstract.
yeah, it turns into existential stuff rather than like direct conflict.
What is
So
the
it's like,
sound of existentialism?
yeah, like what is the sound of your wife like deteriorating? Like, oof, like let's not even go there, because it's turning it into a cartoon kind of well, I mean, nothing wrong with turning things into cartoons, but in this particular
It turns out that
case,
sound is.
yeah, exactly. So I think the thing I decided was just like, this should just be really simple and shouldn't get in the way too much. It has to be able to loop, because I kind of figured this is a game where a lot of it is going to be, and this ended up carrying forward into most of the music for the game, or not most, but about half of the music in the game works this way. This is a game where it only progresses when you as the player progress, right? It's not like a survival 24-hour clock that's going to keep going. So that means there are a lot of cases where the music has to shrink or expand to fit. And the Twine was definitely, absolutely a case of that, because you can just sit there forever on a given screen and never move forward. But on the other hand, you don't want it to just be one loop that goes. That would just be like, because then it would be ignoring what's happening in the actual story. And so I'm like, okay, well, this is a good chance, like a low risk place to test out figuring out what interactive music means in Firewatch. And so the way it works essentially is there are like breakpoints in the Twine, or we refer to it as the Twine, but in the prologue of the game.
It's not the shipping one is not built into
Yeah,
Twine.
it's not built in Twine.
We basically recreated a micro version of Twine inside of Unity, and then
Yeah.
kept calling it that just to
Yep.
confuse everyone. Sorry.
So as you hit those breakpoints, what it does is it then like pings the sound engine and is like, whenever you get a chance, move to the next section of music, and then it finds a point in the music where it is. I have like defined a bunch of points in the music where it's like safe to switch over to the next one, like where it musically sounds good, basically, and then it does like an intelligent crossfade and then continues. But the way that I wrote it was basically just sitting there with it running on a computer and just playing the piano. Like that track is almost all piano. There's piano and a little bit of guitar, and I basically just sat there like playing against it again and again and coming up with these. I think there's like five sort of sections that transition into one another.
And that's the thing is that sort of rare in games. Like I'm trying to think of examples of that come to mind. It's like Monkey Island 2 and
That style
like
of composing
Banjo-Kazooie.
is way more classic adventure games. Like the LucasArts style of the '90s was all about the loops that know how to transition into themselves.
It's becoming more common again now, and like I will point out that like this game doesn't have like if you a game that I was involved with for a couple of years was BioShock Infinite, and that game has a crazy interactive music combat system and stuff where it ramps up and down in combat, and it's like really it's crazier than anything we're doing in Firewatch because this game doesn't have enough. Like it would be weird to do that because it's like you unlocked a door, like you opened a box, like so like we're not doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's definitely becoming more common these days just because the technology is able to sort of recapture some of what you used to only be able to do with like MIDI kind of synthesized sound. That stuff, it was totally possible to like interlock it and additively build on it because it's all a computer doing all the stuff.
Playing all the notes in real time right then instead of having to do like recording mixing.
And now we just have a lot better technology for simulating that using like sampled recordings of real instruments or like complexly layering pre-recorded segments. There are definitely tracks in the game. The twine is not an example of this. The twine just goes from segment to segment and each one's built out. But there are tracks in the game where elements are like slotted in and out. Instrumentation is like added and removed based on where you are. And I hope that if I did a good job, literally nobody is going to notice that. Like they would have no way to know that's happening. It would just sound like, oh, and in the soundtrack it just got a little bit louder here, and like whatever. That was what was supposed to happen. But like there's a bunch of stuff going on under the hood that hopefully is just like completely seamless.
Yeah, I never noticed.
It's so seamless that you, in fact, have not told anyone on the team until now how you
I
built
know.
any of that
I
stuff.
was like,
Well,
really?
it's all different. Like
Yeah.
like the stuff, the end of day 2 stuff is like adding stuff in and out. But then there are 2 tracks in the middle of day 2 that are just one shots. Like they just play for a minute and a half and they're done. And then once you go into day like 9 to 15 to 33, that's like a 3-segment thing with a loop in the middle that has a beginning, middle. Like almost every track in the game is sort of implemented differently.
That's cool.
Are you saying that every major story moment in Firewatch had to have a unique solution that was built by hand?
I mean, I'm going to wrap up talking about this because I've been talking for so long now. But like to that point, just one of the other things about music in terms of like how did I approach music on this game is that the music is actually like really it's like half and half, whether the music is related to a story moment or whether it's actually the exact opposite. Like there are some big story moments that are the most important ones that do have scored music along with them, but most of, I would say at least half the music is like intended to fill dead zones when there is no story happening at all, because we found like, oh, it's actually kind of boring to be walking in this game along a route you've already taken when there's no new dialogue happening and no music. Like that actually is.
Yeah, but
it's
once
dead.
that like traveling music kicks in, it's super awesome, and
Yeah,
you
so
feel
that-
like
so
you just
that's-
want to like
yeah.
go.
That's when I put a lot
punch
of
through
music
trees.
in. Is like those total dead, and that's another case where there's actually a system going on underneath that I made that, like Sean had to use stuff like this, a sort of similar version of this for some of his dialogue that Sean you can talk about. But like the music in a lot of those cases is like waiting for certain conditions to be met. It's like if you've completed this quest and you head through one of these 10 different triggers in
Like
the
parts
world,
of the world, yeah.
and you haven't had any conversation for like the last 30 seconds. Like if all those things are true,
Then you're probably just
then-
wandering around, so it's time for some music.
yeah, then music will start, and then that music track is now like done, and you won't hear like there's no case in this game of hearing the same music twice, I don't think. And so it all there's music that has like similar themes. There's definitely melodies that come back and instrumentation that comes
No
back.
note is played twice.
Well, like, that's
How many
definitely not
notes are there?
but there's no like track that is like used a bunch of times. They're all like day
No battle
specific. I'm
music.
pretty sure all the music is like
Combat A. yeah.
so, anyway.
Delilah's theme. Just like
Dot wab.
I just realized there actually is no Delilah's theme.
There's also no
the
Henry's
music
theme,
at the
really.
very
right?
end,
There's no
maybe
Henry's
you
theme
can kind
either.
of call Delilah's theme maybe when you do
You
Tower.
could call it that,
Yeah.
but there's but
I think
it only
Henry's
happens
theme-
There's
once.
no like
Yeah.
like
and I
Leia
think that's
music
like
that comes in.
definitionally, I think if something only happens once, you can't really call it a theme
Oh,
because the definition of a theme is that it is like
Right.
yeah.
Would you
and so-
describe Henry's theme as boom, 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 boom? That's probably
That's definitely
fair.
just like shit is real theme in our game
Yeah.
for sure. But Brian Goodwin definitely has a theme, and Ned Goodwin definitely has a theme, and those are both used like in various parts of the soundtrack to like just sort of connect thematically.
So like when you're talking about them, or when you find like relics of them, or
So like Brian Goodwin's theme first happens like I'm trying to think.
see his backpack, find his backpack.
No, I think it actually doesn't happen until you actually find his body.
Oh, his
His hideout. His
Sadly.
hideout.
Oh yeah.
His hideout has a theme.
That has music, but it's not his theme yet.
Oh.
It's like his theme, I think, is first when you find his body, and then it recurs in a few points when you're talking about him to Delilah,
Okay.
as I recall. And then Ned Goodwin's theme first occurs, I think, when you're infiltrating the research site, and it's this weird, like, unsettling arpeggio, and then that comes up a bunch more times in the game, like at moments when his influence is like affecting you.
Yeah.
And then I think again as you're finally, and then again in his bunker, and then I think maybe there's like a shred of that when you're hiking to Delilah at the end. I can't quite remember. I don't remember any of this stuff anymore. It's really distressing.
Well, so long ago. Mere weeks. Mere
I
weeks.
know, that's why it's freaking me out.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll shut up about that now.
No, that was great.
We're all sick of hearing you talk about the music of Firewatch.
I know, me too.
Quiet time now, Chris.
It was nice to learn a bunch of stuff.
I
though,
know,
that I
I
didn't
was
know.
like-
I was like, oh, Chris is doing the music. That's all I really knew the entire time.